everyone, to Americans for Limited Government live stream. We want to get right into it today. I think the big thing all of us want to know is, can we save our country from the destruction of Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, and Nancy Pelosi? And Rick, what's the answer?
Says, but right now we have an opportunity to change the course of what's happening and limit the powers of Joe Biden through the administrative state to mess up the rest of the country. And that's where we need to focus now. It's time for the Republicans, particularly in the Senate, but both houses, to stand up, and that they deserve to be the majority in 2023. They're choosing. This is their time to get a backbone and stand up and tell Joe Biden, we're not funding the government unless we defund your vaccination mandates, all the ability to do that, his ability to make it so you can't get monoclonal antibody therapy, and for him to ration that out. We have an opportunity and responsibility. Fight like crazy right now, because the budget, the funding of the government is going to be decided in the month of December. And what the Republicans, particularly in the Senate, do will determine the battles we have to fight the rest of the year for the next 12 months. They have the power and the capacity to shut down the Biden vaccination attack on America if they choose to make certain that they understand that that's what's expected of them. It's not an option. That's what's expected of them. They're going to come and ask us to make them a majority. Well, they darn well better right now show they deserve to be the majority. And that is what we're going to talk about.
Okay, so Rick, there's three things we need to do. The first one is defund any attempt at imposing these vaccine mandates. How is that going to work?
As October 3rd, and that they have to, and the OSHA mandate. You end it right there. And it's not just you can't enforce it, you make it illegal. And that is one way it would end the enforcement of the OSHA mandate, strictly based on Congress saying we will allocate no funds for enforcing this, or working on it in any way, shape, or form. That ends it. Because at that point, if the Labor Department does do something, they would then be not just in contempt of Congress, but they would be impeachable. It would be actionable in federal court as a violation of federal law. So let's make it so HHS, your services, hospitals and doctors saying you have to fire healthcare professionals vaccinated. Let's end it. Let's just say, no, you can't do that. Congress can do that right now. That's what they have to fight for. And lastly, right now, to something, Rubio cannot be allowed to ration monoclonal antibody therapies, and that has to be taken away from him. And let the manufacturers illness. And that is the vaccination kick and start focusing on real treatment. Okay.
Okay, Rick, sorry, I was having some connection problems there. So the second thing you talked about this morning was we want to make sure that Biden has some pressure to build that wall and to put money back into the ICE and the Border Patrol. How do we bring that to pass? What are the pressure points there?
Folks, if you're having a problem with us going in and out of connection, we apologize. We are working to fix that problem right now, actually, with our internet service provider. And if they aren't able to fix it, we're going to switch providers. But right now, this is as good as it gets. So the answer on the wall this is very simple. And 3 years ago, I sat in the Roosevelt Room with President Trump and a few others while we were in the middle of a fight, a budget fight, whether or not the wall was going to get funded. And the government was shut down over the wall funding. And President Trump won, and the wall funding was allocated. And so we were able to build 486, I think, miles of wall in the last year and a half of the Trump administration. Bottom line is, right now we're spending millions of dollars to not build the wall. And what Congress needs to insist upon is that the wall be completed, that they finish the wall at the very least. Second of all, we need to increase the funding for Border Patrol. We need to increase the salaries of those who are in Border Patrol. And we need to make it an attractive job, similarly with ICE. And lastly, we have to put language into the Homeland Security funding bill. And all these bills are collapsed together, by the way. In the Homeland Security funding, we have to put language in that specifically says if they do not enforce the Remain in Mexico policy, Alexander Mahara, the guy who's the cabinet secretary, gets a salary of $1 a year. So make him, if he's not willing to enforce the law, cut his salary to $1 a year. Cut every one of the top executives at Homeland Security, cut their salaries to $1 a year. You do that, they're going to do the Remain in Mexico policy because we have put the problem in their pocketbook at that point. Americans have a right to expect that this government will enforce the law. The law is that the Remain in Mexico policy is in fact constitutional and does in fact work. And Congress can take the stand and tell them with no uncertain terms, if you're found to have not enforced that, if you're not enforcing the Remain in Mexico policy, if you're deviating from that, you no longer get paid. That, my friends, actually puts the problem right in the mortgage payment of the cabinet secretary and the assistant secretaries underneath him. And when you do that, people's attitudes change really, really fast.
Rick, another area that Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer have really plussed up is the funds for the Capitol Police surveillance, and they've really expanded that. But then they've taken money away from Border Patrol and ICE and our border security, and they've, obviously increased their own personal security around the Capitol. Is that an area where we can put pressure on the Senate Republicans to move those funds around and put them back?
They should end all remote. Their congressional Republicans should defund all remote outposts of the Capitol Police. The Capitol Police job is at the U.S. Capitol and immediate vicinity. It isn't to have an operation in Florida or Texas or Arizona where they're looking at having massive surveillance operations being undertaken outside of the Capitol. The last thing this country needs is another federal law enforcement agency engaging in mass surveillance against the public. And I don't care if they're surveilling the right or left. The Capitol Police, that's not their job. They need to stay within their lane. Congress mistakenly, in the wake of January 6th, knee-jerked and gave them a lot of money to do stupid stuff that's outside their purview. They need to rescind that money. They need to say, nope, never mind. We're not spending a dime on that. And by cutting that money, we can reallocate that to border security really fast. Because ultimately, the threat to this country, if you actually believe the Omicron thing is a variant, is this danger to the world that we need to shut down economies in New York and elsewhere, that is so dangerous that we have to react to it before it even hits our shores. If you actually believe that, then you darn well better shut our borders. And if you're not willing to shut our borders to deal with it, then everything else is a lie. Because that's the most obvious solution.
And
don't allow, if you're not going to allow people to fly in from South Africa, you damn well better not allow them to walk across our border.
Rick, are there key senators or House members that people should be targeting that are critical here, that we may have some leverage, that are up for re-election perhaps next year?
Well, up for re-election doesn't, in terms of the Senate, the key people are Mitch McConnell, John Thune from South Dakota, Dick Shelby from Alabama, and from a Homeland Security, Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, who's a pretty good ally, who's really strong. But those four, I think, make the most difference. And the reason for that is McConnell's the Senate Minority Leader. He's in charge of what ultimately you can't do a mass movement of senators without McConnell's approval. And you need at least 41 to say no, and be willing to shut down the government if these things don't happen. So McConnell's the tip of the spear. He's the guy who has to say yes. Thune is the person who's McConnell's successor in waiting, kind of like Prince William with Prince Charles. We don't know when McConnell's going to leave. I guess Prince Charles with Queen Elizabeth, but we don't know when McConnell's going to leave. But Thune's the one who's been groomed to be a successor out of South Dakota, and then Ron Johnson is the head of the ranking in Homeland Security. And Dick Shelby is the ranking in appropriations. And quite honestly, Dick Shelby, when it comes to cutting the deals on what's going to be appropriated, he's the key guy. He's the guy who does it. He's the guy who's sitting and working it every day. And but you need McConnell and Thune and Ron Johnson validating these approaches in order to make this a real concern. And perhaps Marco Rubio, Senate ranking on intelligence. Because he's got the bill that would stop the drug, would allow for or end Biden's ability to make it so you can't get treatment drugs, and so he's got that bill, and we need him to push for it. I'm not saying he isn't, but it's good for him to hear that people want that. So that's five that you can go for right now, and they each make a difference for a different reason. And personally, I think that those are the five that everybody in the country should be reaching out to. And we'll be putting out something in the as a take action on Wednesday, tomorrow, that gives people the tools to do that. But in the meantime, those are the five you should be focusing on, and we'll expand a little bit as we get more information.
So the good news is we can take back our country. There is a strategy afoot, and it involves these spending bills, these must-pass spending bills to keep the government open, that will be brought up in December in the Senate, right? That's our big pressure point.
Absolutely. But the other thing, and I have not mentioned the House because everybody focused, the Senate is the place where the Democrats have to get 10 Republican votes to fund the government, which means it's the one place the Republicans in the Senate have actual real leverage to force changes in legislation. And so and those are two fights that are worth fighting over. On the House side, the Democrats have a 4-vote majority in the House. They have 70 Democrats who are vulnerable, could lose. And they just walked off the fiscal cliff with the Biden wrecks everything bill, the reconciliation bill. But that doesn't mean that they're immune from pressure. And so in the House, this is just a full scale going after individual members, your own individual members, Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter, because ultimately we want Democrats to have to walk the plank again and say, we want an open border. We want them to say, we don't care if we're having to shut down whole sections of hospitals because we're firing people over a healthcare vaccine mandate and leaving our entire healthcare system vulnerable because of essentially President Biden is having a snit over the fact people refuse to take his vaccine. Well, guess what? It's time for those House members, those House Democrats, to eat that. If they want that policy, let them vote against defunding it, because ultimately then they wear it, then they own it, they can't hide. So that's the strategy on the House side. House side is we have to get Kevin McCarthy to backbone up, and he's been doing a reasonably good job lately. But we also have to put an infinite amount of pressure on the Democrats who fear for their political lives over stuff they may not care that much about. And oh, by the way, if you break away and they can't get if they can't get a majority in the House for a funding bill because it doesn't include those provisions, we win.
Well, thank you, Rick. And I appreciate everyone who has been watching. Kimberly Tancreed, she must be a big fan, Rick. She sent us this on Facebook. Actually, says, thank you, Kim.
To end this, thank you. To end this, and Kim kind of reminds me of a very simple fact. The reason this is happening is because people out there, we can facilitate, we can provide ways for people to engage, but it's people in the real world, people who work for a living, not that we don't, but people who work for a living, who don't spend all their time on politics, who sit there and say, this is nuts, and are willing to stand up and take the time out of their day that they had scheduled to do anything but politics, who are getting engaged, getting involved, waking up to what's going on, and telling their politicians that at the state, at the local, and yes, at the federal level, that enough is enough, whether it's CRT, whether it's the obscene stuff they're teaching kids in schools, whether it's the vaccines, whether it's our foreign policy, abandoning our troops in Afghanistan, no matter what it is, whether it's the border, no matter what it is, people are waking up and saying, we've had enough, and they're letting their members of Congress and their other politicians know about that. Because remember this, politicians don't lead. Politicians follow. They follow the public. Politicians are never the first one into the battle. They're always the ones who are willing to march into the city after it's been conquered and take credit. But you have to be the ones that take the city. And so this is taking the city. And I'm not talking in a physical way. I'm not talking in a violent way. I'm talking about it in a very simple way. By letting your politicians know where you expect them to go, you are leading them. And that is what every single one of these Republicans in particular needs. They need the people who love America to lead them back out of the DC wilderness and back into America and what America is. And by doing that, every single one of you who click on and engage, every single one of you who give a couple of dollars, every single one of you who just opens and clicks and reads and then talks to your neighbors, everybody who gets engaged in any way, you are the solution. You are the reason why we have survived the last year. No, we're not out of the woods, but we have survived the last year largely intact. And most importantly, that we have a chance to win right now and stop the insanity of the vax mandates and stop Biden's open border policies. You're the reason that that's true. And if they don't do what we hope they'll do, then you'll be the reason why when they come to you for their votes on election day, you can ask them, well, where were you when we had this fight? Because ultimately, the Senate Republicans and the House Republicans have to give us a case, give us a reason to vote for them. Because we know what they do when they get in control. They basically curl up in a ball like little pill bugs. Well, now they have to fight. And we need to force them to give us a reason to vote for them. Because if they won't give us that reason now, they certainly won't once they have power. So let's put the pressure on them. Let's not let them out. Let's not let up at all. This is the opportunity to force their hands, force them to fight. And it's only by people who are out there letting them know what they think that we'll be able to do that. So I thank every one of you. And if you think this makes sense, forward it to a friend. Like the subscribe button, hit the subscribe button, subscribe, and just give this some legs in terms of passing it around. But most importantly, and the engage, when we send you something to engage on, if it's something you really hit your sweet spot, send it to everybody you can, because we have to grow this movement. We've grown it considerably, but we need to double it in the next 3 months, the number of people we can reach. And the only way we're going to do that is by the people who are seeing this, spreading the word to their friends and cohorts who are fellow believers, because ultimately that's how we're going to grow, is by word of mouth. And lastly, the most effective, Catherine and I both used to work for the National Rifle Association at different times. The single most effective membership recruitment tool the National Rifle Association had and has was member get a member. It was people who cared enough to send the dollars in to be a member, telling others, hey, why don't you join me and be a member? It validates everything, and and so we're not asking to ask people to give money or even become a member, but just get the word into their hands so they can make their own choice about whether to engage. Because we have the majority, we are on the right side, and we will win if America engages to shut the border and end the vax mandates. And once we do that, we will then be able to drive a lot of other policy in this country and take back control of this country, even though the Democrats have a narrow majority on the federal level. It's up to you. We'll keep fighting on our end, but just appreciate everything you guys do. We're coming off of Thanksgiving. I just had to say thanks for everything you guys do. It is just so heartening to us when we see people, the clicks, when we see the actions being taken, when we see people, donating from their own hard-earned money. It really does lift our spirits here at Americans for Limited Government. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Rick, for all that you do. And thanks, everyone. And we'll see you next time on an Americans for Limited Government live stream.